How
You
cute
like
is that
elephants?
elephant?
Yeah.
That's a Bernini elephant. So Bernini, who we saw St Teresa in Ecstasy yesterday, he also made that elephant. So he was an all-around kind of guy. And then you'll see he designed St. Peter's Square. He did some fantastic work with Albigensianism in St. Peter's. Have you ever heard the expression Renaissance man?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, he was a Baroque man, but he was sort of drawing on the Renaissance there. Could do anything. All right, so let me just grab the right notes here. We are outside Santa Maria Sopra Minerva. I had a conversation with Marian about this morning. Does anyone know who Minerva is?
The goddess of wisdom?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you can imagine that underneath this church there was a temple to Minerva, the goddess of wisdom, also known as Athena in the Greek Pantheon. And who is Our Lady? Our Lady is seat of wisdom. So that's something we often pray at the beginning of our meetings at Notre Dame in the School of Philosophy and Theology as well. Yeah, Our Lady's seat of wisdom. And of course our university is Notre Dame, Our Lady.
Our Lady.
So this is a very special place for us as well. Okay, so the church itself, you'll see inside it's quite Gothic. It has beautiful ceilings, beautiful blues, starry ceilings. It's dedicated to Our Lady in many ways. It was a pilgrimage site, as I said this morning before we left, for those who wanted to celebrate the Annunciation. So the moment when the angel Gabriel comes to Mary and says, "Will you be the mother of our Lord?" When she says yes, the Holy Spirit fills her, she conceives Christ, and Christ is in the world. So God is in the world in the womb of Mary, our mother. So that maternity and virginity come through. So Anthony, you were pointing out there was that statue in the Pantheon of Our Lady looking very maternal. She's virgin and mother, and some depictions will really focus on the virginity and some will focus on the maternity. And then you'll get some that are able to mix it up and get it right. But she looks very maternal, like you'd want to give her a cuddle and she'd want to give you a cuddle as well. And we'll see one that's very much like that in the Church of St Augustine as well. This is a church that also has a great heritage with the Dominicans. So if you think about the Dominicans and the Franciscans were very important at a certain moment in history because up until then monastic life or religious life had mainly focused on the Benedictines, who focused on working and praying in one place. So one of the vows of the Benedictine monks is stability. When you enter, you say, "I'm going to live in this place for the rest of my life." And the Benedictines are amazing and transformative and have done so much for the whole of Western civilization. We could talk about that for a while. But what happens in the Middle Ages is that two very strange figures, St. Francis and St. Dominic, emerge. They emerge separately from each other, but they both have this idea that the whole world needs to become their monastery and they need to be going out into the world, not living in the same place. So they have the same vow of poverty as the Benedictines, but this time their vow of poverty goes along with almost being homeless. So they dress in these habits and they go around and they preach and they work on the streets. We'll spend more time with St. Francis obviously on Saturday because we'll go to Assisi. But if we just think about St. Dominic for a moment, St. Dominic did what he did because there was a heresy around the time of St. Dominic, which you might have heard of. It's called Albigensianism. It's a big term. So Albigensius had this idea that there are two equal and opposite forces of good and evil, light and dark. Augustine fell into that trap many centuries before. And that this is what explained everything that was going on in the world. But what went along with this kind of Gnostic thought was the idea that creation, anything material, is bad, is evil, including our bodies, including all of creation. And all of physical creation, I should say. What Dominic saw was how dangerous that was and how wrong that was and how it goes completely against the incarnation. It goes completely against the idea that Christ would love the world, God would love the world so much that he would send his only son, and his son would take on our flesh. His feet would get dusty and dirty. He'd go around eating fish and bread and drinking wine and water, oil, all those things we've been thinking about. The stones underneath his feet, all of this physical existence. So Dominic is so insistent that we need to enjoy all of that and to realize that we're made for greatness, which includes the greatness of all of creation, including our bodies. So you find that kind of emphasis with St Dominic, and he and his preachers, in order to, you can imagine, if you actually care about the salvation of souls, and you can see that there's a terrible heresy going around, you wouldn't want to go out there and say, please delight in God's creation. Don't live your life as though you're under some oppressive force because you're physical. That's not the way that it is. So they go out into the streets, and if you see a Dominican has the letters OP after his or her name, it's the Order of Preachers. And so they would go around preaching on the streets, and they would be bringing the good news wherever they could, and there were mendicants, which means they were beggars. So they didn't own anything themselves, but they would beg. So we have a fine tradition in Sydney at the moment, where we have Dominicans who are looking after our chaplaincy in Sydney, so you'd be familiar with their spirituality there. They produced one of the greatest minds of the Catholic intellectual tradition, who was Thomas Aquinas. Don't call him Aquinas if you can help it, because Aquinas just means where he came from, and it would be like calling me Yarrawonga, and I don't want to be called Yarrawonga, okay? So just, he's Thomas. He's our Thomas Aquinas. The angelic doctor, so because he spoke so much about angels that he came up with our angelology, really goes back to Thomas Aquinas. A tremendous mind. He lived from 1225 to 1275. And so there's a big anniversary of his birth happening right now. I think it's 800 years, if I'm right. The Angelicum just had a big celebration of that, which is the Dominican Pontifical University here in Rome. All right, so the Dominicans, you will find depictions of Thomas Aquinas, you'll find a relic of Thomas Aquinas, you will find the tomb of Fra Angelico. That was not his real name, but he was so wonderful as a painter and as a human that his friends said that he was angelic. So he's the angelic brother. So you'll find his tomb in there. And the best of the best is Catherine of Siena. So Catherine of Siena is a doctor of the church, one of the four, we figured that out the other day, not five but four female doctors of the church. She was born in Siena, and during a time where you were born, each place in Italy was basically a city-state. So we've got Italy as it is right now, but you can imagine the rivalry between Rome, Siena, Florence, all of these different places. So she, at a very early age, when she was about 18, had a mystic experience and decided to devote her entire life to God. She refused to get married. She was an extremely stubborn person. Yeah, quite amazing. And she used to have these visions of Christ. One of the visions of Christ, and Francis of Assisi was like this as well, Christ came to her and gave her the wounds of the stigmata. So the stigmata are the 5 wounds of Christ on the cross, in hands, in feet, and in his side. So she, Padre Pio was like this, like it's happened to lots of saints. They have the wounds, and they actually, every so often, will go through the experience of the pain and suffering of dying on the cross. So she was one of those who had the stigmata. She also had a beautiful vision where Christ came to her and gave her a wedding ring, and another one where Our Lady came to her and said, "Do you want to hold the baby Jesus?" And she wouldn't give him back. She was so happy to hold him. So there are lots of stories about her like that. She lived in Rome for a long time, looking after the poor. She didn't necessarily want people to be following her, but they did. They called themselves her family, La Familia. And she has written wonderful things. She wrote something called The Dialogue, which is basically her recalling her conversation with God during her mystic experiences. So it's a wonderful thing. But her letters are amazing. She gives advice, but she also reams people out, including the Pope, who at that point had left Rome in what we call the Babylonian captivity. For about 70 years, the popes had gone to France, and she was determined that the Pope should be in Rome. So she's someone who very invested in that apostolic understanding that Rome is the place where Peter and Paul came, where they finally died. You know, Peter's bones are here. This is the place for the centrality of the church and the centrality of the Pope. She saw that everything was falling apart because the Pope was not in Rome. So the whole social order was falling apart in Rome itself, but then she could see that just in the terms of the way that the church was being governed, it was falling apart. So she nagged him until he said, all right, I'll come. And then she said, okay. And she went to France and followed him and made sure that he was coming all the way back. And then he came back. And then she took care of, so most of her work, besides that, kind of political work and thinking work and praying work, she looked after the poor, and really the poorest of the poor. So people who no one else would go to look after, she would look after them. And she would have... she once was looking after a beggar, and she had this vision that it was actually Christ lying down in front of her. So and it's that kind of revelation of the mystery, which Christ says, if you do something for someone else, then you're doing it for me. She had that very, very intensely. And then she died, I think, way too young. But anyway, she died here in Rome. And her body is here. Her head is in Siena. And there's a beautiful tomb of her underneath the altar here as well. Okay? It's a very Catholic thing. Yeah. Sorry, Abby. And if you go there to Siena, you actually see the head. But here, what you see is a beautiful statue of her laid out. So when I teach Catherine of Siena, when I used to teach medieval philosophy, we would use an excerpt from the dialogue, but also from her letters. And what she would often say at the end of her letters was, be up and doing. So it was like, I'm praying now. What do I do with God? Having filled my soul with so much love, I go out and I bring that love into the world. So she's the perfect kind of way of thinking through the active and the contemplative life and how one kind of feeds off the other. All right, so what we're going to do is, if you just follow me around for a few minutes, I'll show you a few things. And then what we'll do is that I'll let you explore for a little bit. And I'll see what time it is when I've shown you a few things, and then we're going to go over to San Agostino. Yep? Okay.
Of course.
Yeah, still plenty of time.
Mm-hmm.
Did they cut off the head, or is it already cut?
I don't know. You have to ask Renée. I don't know. But usually the body is divided after.
Oh.
So, well, look at the cosmic.
Back to that, we were talking about Kairos yesterday, weren't we, Mario? So in philosophy and theology, there's a distinction between Kairos and chronos. So chronos is like clock time. So when I say to you, okay, we've got to be there at 8:50 and we're leaving at 9 o'clock, that's clock time. But Kairos is when something is revealed to us from eternity at a moment in history, and it's as though you're participating in something that transformed the entirety of humanity. So why would you put Thomas Aquinas here at the moment of the Annunciation? We all want to meditate. We did this in the Rosary, right? We meditate on these moments in the life of Christ, in the life of the Virgin Mary, where what happened then affects us right now. It's like the gladiator thing. What we do in life echoes in eternity. Well, this time it's eternity echoing in our lives. So you have Thomas Aquinas contemplating and at the same time presenting the cardinal to her, and he's the cardinal and this is his chapel. So if you have enough money one day, folks, and enough power, maybe you can get someone to do something like this for you. The angels are fantastic. Look at the way they're singing, they're playing beautiful instruments. You've got another very interesting Renaissance theme. It's about there's a humanizing factor going on. It's kind of like, imagine if in your daily life this were to happen. So Mary is dressed like a Renaissance woman. She's in a Renaissance room. This is not Nazareth, and yet it is Nazareth, right? And then these are the scenes from the daily life of the people who would have, it's all about imagining yourself in this scene to bring home the point that what happened was about us. It has to do with us. It's about our humanity and about our calling to something greater. So it's just a beautiful chapel.
On those, like the yeah. And the embellishments.
Yes. So, of course, Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel. Everybody was nude. The sculpture was also done. I didn't tell you was that this place in the 1500s, it was Rome was flooding, and people came into the church for sanctuary, and they prayed, please Mary, stop the flooding, and it stopped right at the door. So there's, I think there is actually a sign outside that says how far the water came. I'm not sure, maybe we can have a look outside when we see it, yeah. So you get that sense of Our Lady giving refuge. You find lots of depictions of Mary in the Middle Ages where it's Our Lady of Mercy, and she's got a cloak, and she has it opened up and people are protected inside her cloak. So you might see some depictions of that as we're going around as well. That's Our Lady of Mercy. Yeah. I'd like to be in there.
St Dominic is depicted that way in Bologna.
Is he?
Yeah, in his tomb in Bologna.
Oh, yeah.
He's being wrapped up in her cloak.
In her mantle.
Yeah.
That seems like the Pantheon.
It is, isn't it? The offering?